Who spends your money better, you or Washington, D.C.? Stay tuned. This is Libertarian Viewpoint, and I'm your host, Sue Jeffers. Libertarianism is all about liberty. Liberty is the exercise of freedom that doesn't impinge on the rights of others. We have all heard the constant drum roll of government solutions. The purpose of this show is to allow you to see for yourself why non-government solutions are a better alternative. Today's guest is our new friend, Walter E. Block. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk about free markets.
Wonderful.
I love free markets.
Me too.
And I want to explain to people, you're a professor down at Loyola University, and you've been a professor for how long?
Oh, about 45 years.
Oh my gosh. And you are an econ professor.
I am, yes.
And you know, you say the word economics and people's eyes glaze over, and I want to tell you I think it's fascinating. And I really want to talk about the importance of free markets and how I think capitalism in general and free markets in particular have kind of gotten a bad rap. And well, I'll let you start. You're the professor.
Well, you're absolutely right. Capitalism has got a bad rap, but the way I see it, there are really two kinds of capitalism, and people conflate the two. They confuse the two. They don't distinguish between them, and there's a gigantic difference between them. One is laissez-faire capitalism or free enterprise. The other is crony capitalism or economic fascism, and there's really nothing in common between the two except this name that gets tagged on both of them. The Occupy movement, they're against capitalism, but they don't know which kind of capitalism they're against. They say they're against capitalism, and the reason they're against capitalism is because of the bailouts to Wall Street or the bailouts to Detroit or whatever, but that's not laissez-faire capitalism. That's this crony capitalism where the big businessmen run things and get their cronies in the political sphere to give them taxpayer money. And that's a horrendous system, and I oppose it bitterly. Whereas laissez-faire capitalism, or free markets, means pretty much voluntary trade. The essence of capitalism is the libertarian notion of non-aggression, or you keep your mitts to yourself. Like, I've been admiring your green jacket. I think it's a great green jacket, and there are two ways I can get that green jacket out of you. One, I can say, I'll be your best friend forever if you give it to me, or I'll give you $5 or $50 or $100.
Okay.
and if you agree, I get it, and if you don't agree, I don't get it. But under crony capitalism or governmentalism or fascism, if I'm a demagogue and I can convince the masses that I ought to have your green jacket, we can all vote to take it from you through taxes and give it to me. And that's a horrible system because we have a word for that. It's called theft. So the only way in true capitalism or free enterprise that you can get anything is through voluntary interaction. And that's the only civilized, non-barbaric way to be. Whereas if I just grab your coat, that's uncivilized, that's improper, that's immoral.
I think you're right when you say a lot of people confuse the two types of capitalism. I want to spend a few minutes here talking about crony capitalism. I want to talk about public-private partnerships and how government gets involved in our lives in the effort to try to help us, of course. And it is theft. It is plain and simple theft.
Yeah, I'm from government. I'm here to help you. But all government really has is a gun when you get down to it, because if you don't pay your taxes, they're not going to shoot you right off. They'll write you a nice letter. Hey, did you forget? You know, come on, pay us. We need the money. We do good, whatever. After 2 or 3 letters, they escalate and say, you better get your rear end in the gear and give us the money. And after that, some guys in a blue uniform with a gun and a badge will come and say, come join us in jail. So it's just naked aggression. Now, some people say it's a necessary evil, and here the radical libertarians and the moderate libertarians diverge. The moderate libertarians say, well, yes, government is a necessary evil, sort of like Ron Paul, and we have to have very, very strictly limited government, and the only proper function is to protect persons and property. And to that end, we need armies to keep foreign bad guys off of us, police to keep local bad guys off of us, and courts to determine who the good guy and the bad guy are. And that's roughly Ron Paul's position, that we should just limit government. The much more radical libertarian view would be libertarian anarchism, which would say that even these functions, the police power, should be done by private enterprise. But that's a very radical position. The more moderate position, the one that Ron Paul, as I say, is advocating, is very extremely limited government, and its only function is to protect persons and property.
Let's talk a little bit about, by the way, I love Ron Paul.
Oh, me too.
He's been in Minnesota. He's visited many cities in the state, and I think he brings up so many wonderful points. The article that he wrote on cash for clunkers and why it was such a bad idea, government idea, of course, why it was such a horrible idea, was the best article I've ever read. And I use the example over and over and over again. Why would you take good cars and destroy them? And how all it did was interfere with the free market. And all it did was come in and take a bunch of good cars off the road. So now if you're a poor person trying to buy a used car now, a year or two later, the used cars, because there's a smaller market, all of a sudden used cars are outrageously expensive. That Cash for Clunkers program hurt not only because government gave handouts for the cars, but also because it interfered with the free market.
Absolutely. The poor people before had a choice between walking and a poor car. Now they have a choice between walking and a Maserati or a really good car that they can't afford, which means they're back to walking. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. The other part of it is that in order to get the cash, where did he get that cash from? Well, either he created out of the thin air through the Fed.
Like the government does.
Like the Federal Reserve System.
We don't get to do that.
Well, if we do that, they call it counterfeiting, and they're very nasty about counterfeiting, but that's what they're doing. This is legal counterfeiting. Or they tax us. So, I mean, where did Obama or Bush or whoever was in charge, where did he get the money from? If he used his own money, I'd have no objection. If he wants to say, okay, Bill Gates, give me a lot of money and I'll go buy cars, that's okay. But he doesn't do that. What he does is he's generous or foolish with our money, which is theft, and it's unjustified.
Cash for Clunkers is such a perfect example of government interfering in the market. And then they took it one step further. They took it into appliances and into home building and into Detroit.
That's right. They're having cash not for clunkers, but for Detroit. They also had cash for houses in New Orleans that were submerged, which is a whole other issue. But they had cash for Detroit. Now, you don't have to be a genius to work on the assembly line. I mean, it's a responsible job. You can't be drunk, and you have to, have your wits about you. But they were making like $75 an hour, thanks to unions, which are an abomination. And Detroit was going bankrupt because the unions are sort of like a leech or I don't know, a rattlesnake or something. And the companies that paid them their union wages were going broke, and Obama bailed out Detroit. Now that's cash for a whole city, and it's highly problematic. That's really socialism. See, a lot of what's going on is fascism, where they have regulations. But this was actual socialism, where the government takes an ownership spot in the company, and that's really socialism. And people say that Obama is a socialist. He's mainly a fascist, but he's a little bit of a socialist. And Detroit is a marvelous case. And I guess bailing out Wall Street is also a bit that's more crony capitalism or fascism, because he didn't take an ownership role in Bear Stearns or any of these companies.
Yeah, he only took over the car companies. I mean, that's what I thought was so interesting about that. You have contracts between a company and their workers, and contracts between the company and the unions, and you have shareholders. And here, the United States government, thank you, President Obama, came in and said, yeah, all those contracts, well, they don't count. Here's a whole bunch of money. Here's what you're going to do. They came in and they nullified all of those contracts.
Yes, and contracts are really at the core of capitalism, because, getting back to me buying your green jacket, if we have a contract and I give you $100 for your green jacket and then you don't give me the jacket, well, in effect, you've stolen my $100. So contracts are really integral, very important for the free market society. And if you break up contracts, you break up commerce. I mean, if I give you the 100 and you don't give me the jacket, the next time maybe I'm not going to want to buy anything. I'm not going to want to give any money to anyone lest they not give me the stuff that I thought I was buying.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And by the way, I keep hearing over and over and over again that the car companies have paid us back. No, they haven't. They still owe us $37 billion, and I want my money back.
That would be nice. But even if they have paid us back, they shouldn't have got the money in the first place.
Exactly.
Just because, if I rob your green jacket, I don't know why I'm so fixated on it, and then I give it back, well, better that I give it back than not. But I shouldn't have taken it in the first place because it's your property, and they shouldn't have given our property to the big three or the big two auto companies.
And of course, people are going to say, well, then what should have happened? I'll tell you what should have happened, and I bet we agree on this. They should have failed.
I'd be shocked. Yes, we agree. Amazing. I can't understand how that happened. But you see, we think of business success, and I'm all in favor of business success. But there is such a thing as business failure. I mean, in the body, the dead cells have to go away. And if the dead cells don't go away, then there's no room for the live cells. Look, if we're going to prop up businesses, we might as well have propped up the horse and buggy industry, and the car industry never would have come about. And then there's one of my favorites, the typewriter industry. No, I mean, the poor typewriter industry, I mean, and the photographic industry in Rochester, Kodak. Why didn't we bail them out?
Good point.
Well, because if we bailed them out, then we wouldn't have the new kind of photographs or the new kind of typewriters. I tell my students about a typewriter, they don't know what it is. Well, I know what it is, but we don't have it anymore except in museums, and that's fine. That's the way it should be. There are so many industries that are no longer with us because the market is composed of two things: profit and loss, success and failure. And if you just want to take one, it's sort of like an airplane needs two wings to fly. Well, the market needs success and failure. And if you're going to just try to cover up or paper over failure and not allow failure to occur, then you're going to reduce the efficiency of the economy. People aren't going to be able to get new products that they want because they'll be stuck with the horse and buggy or the hula hoop or whatever it is that we're protecting.
And crony capitalism, think about this. I owned a bar and restaurant for 30 years. They never once bailed out the bar and restaurants. Where's our bailout?
Well, you just don't have political pull. I mean, if you were better organized and, you had a voting bloc or something, who knows? Maybe they'll bail it out. For all I know, there's no rhyme or reason. They'll bail out anything or everything, and sometimes they bail out greenhouses. They bailed out Solandra, which was this somehow green energy thing. They got this fetish about green. I'm not insulting your jacket, but radical green environmentalism. We have to have windmills and stuff, even though it kills birds, which is I love to see them hoist up by their own petard, so to speak, that on the one hand that they love windmills, on the other hand they love birds, or boids as we call them in Brooklyn where I'm from, and the birds are being killed by the windmills, so you just have to love that.
Yes, I do love the irony of that. We did a show in the past about windmills and the battle here in Minnesota against windmills, and you know how we finally won it? With the environmentalists. They came in and they found all these eagles' nests that were down there. And all of a sudden, the windmills are in trouble now.
Thank God for environmentalists. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
For once, they were on our side. And
Right.
It was the eagles, the birds, and the bats that ultimately said, well, wait a minute, we have to relook at these windmills. And I thought it was interesting that you brought up Solyndra, too, because that has been a huge thing for the Obama administration, is billions and billions of dollars into green energy. This is capital cronyism.
They're trying to pick winners is the idea, but they don't realize that only the market and the consumers, in effect, can pick winners. They have no way of knowing which businesses will be successful and which won't. That's why God invented Wall Street. Thank God for Wall Street, because this is the crucible. This is the way we can determine who gets investment money. And if you succeed, you make money, and if you don't, you fall by the wayside and have to go out and do something else that the consumer wants. But if the government steps in and puts a big, fat, ugly thumb on one side of the balance beam, well, then it ruins the market, and we have crony capitalism. And of course the Occupy Wall Street people are justified in opposing this, but they don't realize that there's this gigantic chasm, a gigantic divide between fascism and free enterprise. They both begin with an F, I guess, yeah, but they've got nothing really in common. They're opposites, and yet people see them as the same thing because they're both seeking after profits. Well, yeah, but one is seeking after profits honestly by satisfying consumers, making a lower price, a better product, better service. The other is trying to get it through theft. Some people call it rent-seeking. I don't like that word because rent is a perfectly good word, and I don't want to use it for theft or plunder or booty-seeking. But that's really the way all too much of our supposed free enterprise system works, and it's a crime and a disgrace.
I keep telling people that our legislators here in Minnesota and in Washington, D.C., I keep telling them, you have no business in venture capitalism. You're bad venture capitalists. And every time I see the legislators, whether in D.C. or Minnesota, try to pick winners and losers, people don't realize how damaging this is to our economy. It costs us more in tax dollars. It costs us more in regulation. And you're exactly right when you sum it up, that government has put their finger on the scale and tipped it towards a particular entity, usually not the one I'm on board with.
Now look, if these rascals want to be capitalists and want to be venture capitalists and invest, let them do it with their own money. I have no objection to Mr. Obama, private citizen, investing in whatever, or Solandra if he wants. And if he succeeds, he'll make money, and if he doesn't, he won't. That's fine, but what he's doing is despicable. He's doing it with our money. How dare he? Why is he taking my money to invest? I mean, that's just preposterous.
And especially think about it. Whether, and we're kind of picking on Solyndra, but the same thing applies to high-speed rail. The same thing applies to several other different programs that we've seen happen. The money is, well, the Fed does print it out of thin air, but there isn't a money tree growing behind the state capitol in St. Paul or in Washington, D.C. They make this money, and it hurts us. Our money doesn't go as far then. Absolutely.
Look, when the Fed started in 1913, a dollar was a dollar. Now it's about 3 cents, so they've dissipated 97% of it. Look, if by turning the printing press, you could have a successful economy, then the German hyperinflation of 1923 shouldn't exist, or that it should have been a success. Zimbabwe, where to buy a loaf of bread is $1 trillion or something, it should be a rip-roaring success because they've got lots of money floating around. No. The only way to have economic growth is to have people work harder and smarter with better capital equipment. And how do you get people to work harder and smarter with better capital equipment? Other people have to invest in education or in capital equipment like, I don't know, bulldozers or what have you to build buildings. And the only way they're going to do it is if they feel secure that they're going to get a return. Otherwise, they'll go elsewhere. There's this wonderful case of Bjorn Borg, who was a tennis player of a decade or two back. And in Sweden, which seems to be the way Obama is pushing us towards Sweden, they had a marginal tax rate of 110%, which means if Bjorn Borg earned an extra million, they would tax him 1.1 million. So he'd be 100,000 minus if he earned $1 million. Well, what did he do? He moved to Monaco. So if you're gonna pluck the golden goose, you're not going to get any golden eggs if you kill the goose. I mean, it's a cliche, but it certainly works here. And they call the market greedy. These are the greedy people. They're grabbing stuff that doesn't belong to them. If that's not greed, I don't know what is.
They're grabbing more and more and more of our money, and they are going to kill the golden goose. But Bjorn Borg isn't the only one. I mean, Bono from U2. And you talk, we hear a lot of talk now about the Buffett rule, about how if we just tax the billionaires, we're going to be fine. Well, A, there aren't enough billionaires. B, they're mobile billionaires. They're going to leave. And C, when the government continues to spend, because that's what it does, it takes the discussion into who should we tax, the other guy, instead of us, it hurts all American people because they're going to have to come back and tax all of us so that they can keep finding the revenue to spend it on the things that they want to spend it on, whether it's Solyndra or high-speed rail or windmills or whatever.
You know, they say, I think it is, I'm not sure, but I think 7 out of the 10 richest counties in the country, You'll never guess which city they're all around. Washington, D.C., of course.
That doesn't surprise me.
You're shocked.
They're flourishing out in Washington,
They're
D.C.
doing very well there. What benefit is there of a system where we send all of our money from Minnesota here or New Orleans, where I'm from, we send it all to Washington, and then they take a nice hefty cut of it, and then they send it back to us? And that's supposed to enrich us? Why don't we just spend the money for ourselves? Why do we need them to take a cut? Why do we have to go through the middleman of Washington, D.C.? Now, I'm not against middlemen on the market, but political middlemen, we send all our money there. They send half of it back or 3/4 of it back. They keep a nice hefty chunk of it. And that's supposed to be helping economic development? No, that hurts economic development.
Louisiana is actually smarter than Minnesota. Your tax freedom day is earlier than the state of Minnesota. You get more money from the federal government. Here in Minnesota, we send $1 out to Washington, D.C., and we get 70 cents back. You guys are way ahead of us.
Well, we should all band together and nullify some of this stuff. I mean, states' rights. I mean, you know, states' rights has got a bad odor about it because you think that states' rights means, I don't know what, slavery or Jim Crow or something. That's silly.
Silly.
Just absolutely silly. States' rights means that we shouldn't be sending everything to Washington. They're not geniuses in Washington. They don't know what they're doing, and they're ruining the economy.
And yes, they are ruining the economy. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the government side of the economy. I call it the bad side of the economy. Let's talk about real free markets and how can we get back towards real free market. If you read the paper, you read a lot about Keynesian economics.
Keynesian. Yes.
Keynesian economics.
Right.
And I don't like that kind.
No, Keynes is the bad guy.
I want you to, yes, he is the bad guy.
Right.
Now, I want you to address a real free market and how we would get back to a real.
Well, Keynes, as far as I'm concerned, is a charlatan. He thinks that we can have an economy by digging holes in the ground and then filling them up again. I mean, the whole point of a job is to create product, not to have a job for a job's sake. A job is a negative. What we want is the products that jobs create, not jobs themselves. The way to get back to a free enterprise system is to lower taxes and lower regulations and get rid of excessive departments, as Ron Paul is trying to do. One of my pet peeves is this thing, the minimum wage law. Evil, abomination. And yet,
when we're done, let's come back and talk about minimum wage for a second. They're thinking about raising it again.
Oh,
now.
And what's really horrible is that what's his name, Romney, who's supposedly the free enterprise guy. He favors the minimum wage. He doesn't favor raising it, or I'm not sure exactly what his position is, but Ron Paul's position is get rid of it, and maybe sow salt where once it stood. And my own view is put in jail the people responsible for it.
I agree.
Because it's just an abomination, and it hurts the least skilled people. The unemployment rate of young black men is double, triple the unemployment rate of anyone else. A lot of people think that the minimum wage law is a law that you put it under wages, and as you raise it, you boost wages. No, that's not the proper analogy. The proper analogy is sort of like a hurdle. You put the hurdle here, and in order to get a job, you have to jump over the hurdle. But the higher the minimum wage law is, the harder it is to jump. And if you put it too high, then a lot of people can't get a job. Look, why screw around with $10 an hour minimum wage, which they call a living wage? Why not go to $20 an hour or $50 an hour? Let's have $50 an hour, because $50 is better than 10, right? I mean, it's higher. Advanced math will show you that. Now, if we did that, anyone who had a productivity level of less than $50 an hour would be unemployed. Let's suppose that I have a productivity level of $30 an hour. And now you're thinking of hiring me, but you have to pay me $50. Well, if you have to pay me $50, you're going to lose $20 an hour on me. You're not going to hire me.
You're right.
So how does that help me?
It doesn't. I'm not hiring you.
No, certainly not at a minimum wage of $50 an hour. But right now, the minimum wage over the whole country is something like $7.50 or $7 an hour. Well, what about a person whose productivity is $5 an hour? You hire him, you lose $2 an hour, you're not hiring him. And if he were hired at $5 an hour, he would sort of learn the ropes. He'd learn to come in on time to his job. He'd learn not to argue with the customer's always right, to be nice to the boss, whatever. He'd get acclimatized to the work situation. But he can't. So what he's doing is he's being idle. And when young kids, teenagers are idle, the devil's work is idleness. There's some aphorism to that effect. So there's more crime and more drug. That's a whole other issue. Prohibition of drugs is another way that we could more approach the free enterprise system. Get rid of all these regulations. Get rid of regulations that support unions, like Obama is now wanting to get rid of the, the secret ballot for unionism. The way unions go around, they say, hey, will you sign this? And you're afraid if you don't sign it, I won't like you. I'll cut your tires or something. So you sign it. And then when you vote against the union. But now they want to have this view that as long as you get 50% of the workforce to sign it, there'll be a union. Well, that's just the recipe for disaster. So you said, well, how can we get closer to free enterprise? Well, we discussed lowering taxes, and the other is lowering regulations. Those are the two things. And I guess the third one is get rid of the Fed, or as Ron Paul would say, end the Fed, end the Fed. And that's what his
I'm all in favor of that, too.
So these are the big three: taxes, money, and regulations. That's what's keeping us, to a great degree, from free enterprise. And if we got rid of those three things or reduced them radically, here I'm a radical, we'd approach economic sanity and prosperity and wealth, and we'd get rid of this depression.
One more market I want to talk about, and we're down to our last minute now, the black market. How does that relate? We talk about crony capitalism. We talk about the free market. Is the black market the ultimate free market?
Thank God for the black market. It's the only thing that kept the Soviet Union from starvation for many years. Thank God for the black market in drugs and prostitution and pornography and whatever, because people want this stuff and it's being prohibited. They're now starting with cigarettes. They're making cigarettes almost illegal because you can't use it here, you can't use it there, you can't use it anywhere. So black markets, in a sense, are the market, but it's a distorted market. Mm-hmm. Much better to legalize it and you don't have a black market.
Right. In New York, they actually go to other states, steal van loads of cigarettes and bring them back across so that they don't have to pay the taxes attached to cigarettes in New York.
Well, when the taxes get so high, it's in effect almost like a prohibition.
Right. It's crazy.
Yeah, they're just lunatics out there. And I think part of the reason is that the electorate is economically illiterate. And I think part of the benefit of your show and other shows like yours is that we are trying to educate people on economics. And hopefully they'll go out and read a book maybe by Henry Hazlitt or a book by Ludwig von Mises or any of the Austrian economists and will educate themselves.
Exactly. Here's to the free market.
Hooray.
Well, we've run out of time. This has been Libertarian Viewpoint, the show that brings you the non-government, liberty-based solution that other media will not tell you about. Liberty works. Liberty is always the best choice. If someone in government can prove otherwise, I challenge them to speak up. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned to other shows of Libertarian Viewpoint.